For us in Washington. Great explanation.
All right, let's now bring in Geraldo Rivera. Fox News. Good to have you on the couch.
Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Good morning.
Such a busy month. You've been doing an incredible job on the road there. I can't imagine the things that you saw. But we want to get your take first on this Iran nuclear deal. And my question to you, why are Democrats so up in arms about this? The president is not saying we're doing away with this deal yet. He says, I want Congress to do their job and really push back on Iran, which is still the #1 sponsor of terror in the world. Why is that so bad, Geraldo?
Well, I think that what is in that story, Abby, is the fact that people ask me, particularly my wife and her friends, how can I still be friends with the President of the United States when he has all of these policies that are so wildly inappropriate, certainly from the progressive half of the political spectrum? My answer is there are two Donald Trumps, and I've known him forever, and I think that I have the ability to assess where his head is at. There's the Donald Trump who is the tweeter, bombastic, impetuous, impassioned. And then when you examine in the sober light of what has actually happened, what he did, you see that he is well within the norms of a moderate Republican president, and the policies that he espouses are traditional policies. Sometimes he couches them in flamboyant packaging, so to speak. And I think the Iran nuclear deal is a classic example of that. On the one hand, he's very ferocious. They are not honoring the spirit of the deal. If they don't do this, if they don't do that, I want Congress to do this, I want Congress to do that. But in the cold, sober light of day, you look at it and you say, guess what? The Iran nuclear deal is still in place.
Right.
So I think that they will modify it around the edges, and they will maybe forge a better deal going forward. But my point is, this is not a radical president. This is a traditional moderate president with unorthodox packaging.
But the response isn't moderate. You've got Democrats saying this is going to lead to World War III. You've got not a deal ratified by the Senate as in a treaty under the Obama administration, and the president within the Constitution, to your point about this, I call him the constitutional president. He says, I'm the executive, you're the legislative, you should be doing this. So you talk about the more progressive relatives who are looking at him personally, but why not look at him for what he does? Because he's going within the boundaries of the Constitution.
I definitely think that this president has the worst relationship, not only with the press, but with those on the other side of the aisle than I have seen since Richard Nixon in 1972 and 1970.
The press came after him.
David, believe me, I'm not suggesting that it is his fault. I am suggesting that when you live in a divided household like mine, and I suspect that we are
most Americans
commonplace all across the board, he does not get the benefit of the doubt for anything. Anything he does is construed in the most wicked, negative way possible. And, you know, having just experienced, Abby, you mentioned my Puerto Rico trip, having seen how he was treated in Puerto Rico and then seeing the press about how he was treated in Puerto Rico, it was almost an absolute 100% disconnect. I saw crowds that loved him. I saw crowds that were very ebullient about the fact that he was there. President Obama only visited Puerto Rico once in 8 years, and that was for a $4 million fundraiser.
So we're not getting the real story here, to your point. I mean, you were on the ground there.
What is the real story on the ground?
Well, the real story, sadly, is that there is enormous work to be done. This is the worst natural disaster in modern history. Never have so many Americans been so negatively impacted. We are all righteously concerned about what's happening in the wildfires in California, but you're talking about people in the order of magnitude of tens of thousands. In Puerto Rico, it is millions of people that are involved. Their homes are wrecked. They have no electricity. They have no water. It is absolutely awful. The next question is, how is FEMA and the federal government doing in response to this crisis? Far better than they are given credit for, as was the president's performance in Puerto Rico, far better than he was given credit.
All right. Another huge story that we are obviously talking a lot about, the Harvey Weinstein situation. As a reformed lawyer talking to another reformed lawyer here, Hillary Clinton falsely claims Donald Trump is an admitted sex assaulter as she compares him to Harvey Weinstein, but claims allegations against Bill are clearly in the past. Before we get to this soundbite, actually, let's get to the soundbite now. Then I want to follow up with a question because something's bothering me big time about this. Take a listen.
This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated anywhere, whether it's in entertainment, politics.
Well,
you know, after all, we have someone admitting to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office. There has to be a recognition that we must stand against this kind of action that is so sexist and misogynistic.
And this depends upon women coming forward and having the courage to come forward.
Right.
And yet in your book, the three women brought onto stage by Trump attacking your husband, and you kind of dismissed them. Was that the right thing to do? Are you sure about that?
Well, yes, because that had all been litigated. I mean, that was the subject of a huge, investigation, as you might recall, in the late 90s. And there were conclusions drawn, and that was clearly in the past.
Before we play lawyer Geraldo, how do you respond to that?
Well, I respond several ways, Todd. I think that, I'm the father of daughters. I respond that way. I am also someone who was a friend to President Clinton at that time. It seemed to me that he paid a terrible, a profound price for his extracurricular activities. How he abused Monica, how he did whatever he did to the other women, I don't know. But this was a president, for the second time in the history of the Republic, who was impeached. I mean, he bears that big red eye forever. President Clinton, however charming he may have been and has since retained that charisma, he is someone who is only the second time after Andrew Johnson, a sitting president who was impeached by the Congress of the United States. He was ultimately acquitted, but he paid a very severe price. And I think that when you recall that President Clinton was more popular at the end of his term than he was in the beginning in some ways, I think that the American people tended to forgive him. Now, I thought when President Trump went after the Access Hollywood tape, when President Trump went after Bill Clinton and brought Paula Jones and so forth to that debate that he did something that was really very underhanded, very wicked, that he made Hillary pay for the sins of Bill Clinton. The issue of whether or not she was an aider and abettor, I leave to the viewer, because I think people have different ideas.
But is he an admitted sexual accuser? That's the phrase, right?
That is the textbook definition of slander. When you accuse somebody of having committed a crime, as a Yale-educated lawyer, she should know that.
Well, she is also a wife. And someone who lost an election because of her husband and because of Uma Abedin and Anthony Weiner. She lost, and I think that is the burden women candidates bear going forward.
Well, that's so yesterday.
They have to carry the load of their husbands.
Those three words she used. Geraldo, let's address that to your point. Admitted sexual accuser. Not that, just like she said about Bill, that was so yesterday she lost. Now these three words being tossed at President Trump.
David, whether it is in politics, as in the case of the Clintons, whether it's in the news media, as in the case of some of our own colleagues and some of the others who have fallen by the wayside, or whether it is in Hollywood, sex harassment stinks. And having lived through many decades and many different social mores, I can tell you that times have changed. I grew up in the, Jane Mansfield, Marilyn Monroe, the Playboy centerfold were our cats meow back in those days. Times changed. That was the free love in the 60s and the 70s. Times changed. But Harvey Weinstein represents an enduring stereotype. This big, fat, hairy, sweaty, bejeweled, emperor of movies, has serial 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds coming into his office desperate for a break in show business. Instead, what they get is, okay, you do me something and I'll do you something. The casting couch is horrifying. Harvey Weinstein is like one of the most malignant examples of the casting couch. But I think that this inequality between subordinates and superiors is something that men now know. And Abby, you know this. Men now know that they do any of this stuff at their peril. That this is, you screw up, your career is ruined. We have plenty of examples close to home.
As it should be.
It's alarming that it takes women so long now, still in today's day and age, to come out, and even in Hollywood.
Disconnected and deflecting to call in the president an admitted sexual accuser. I'm still waiting on that one.
One quick point. I hate that we applaud when it's our ideological enemy who falls, and we cover up for our.
This has
Geraldo,
nothing to do with ideology. This is disgusting.
Take politics out of it.
Let's leave it there.
Geraldo, good to have you on.
Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America.